Have you ever looked back at a moment and realized the real damage was not what happened to you, but how you reacted to it? Not the insult itself, not the delay, not the disrespect, your reaction. That is one of the hardest things to admit, because the mind always wants to focus on the outside, what they said, what they did, how unfair it was. But Stoicism keeps bringing you back to a more uncomfortable truth. Your life is shaped less by what touches you and more by what you let move you. That is where power is either built or lost, because life does not always break you through force. Sometimes it breaks you by pulling the wrong emotion out of you at the wrong time. A little anger and your judgment narrows. A little pride and you say too much. A little fear and you abandon your position. A little urgency and you make a decision your calmer self would never have made. This is why reaction matters so much. A person who cannot govern their inner world will keep handing away power without noticing it. But the one who learns to stay steady, to delay response, to see clearly before acting, becomes very difficult to manipulate. So, in this episode, I want to walk with you through 12 brutal Stoic truths about reaction, control, and power. Not to make you colder, but to make you harder to move in the wrong way. Harder to bait, harder to read, harder to control. And the first truth begins here. Truth 1. Every reaction exposes a weak spot. Every strong reaction tells you something. It shows you where you are still easily touched, easily shaken, easily pulled out of yourself. That is why Stoicism takes your reactions so seriously. Not because emotion itself is wrong, but because reaction reveals where self-mastery is still missing. If a small insult can ruin your whole mood, that is not just about the insult. It is showing you there is still a part of you that depends too much on respect from the outside. If silence from someone throws you into anxiety, it is revealing how quickly your peace becomes dependent on another person's behavior. If criticism makes you instantly defensive, it may be exposing an insecurity you have not fully faced. That is what makes reaction such a brutal teacher. It does not only express emotion, it exposes structure. It shows you where your inner foundation is still weak. And this matters because it changes how you look at uncomfortable moments. Instead of only saying, "Why did that bother me so much?" you begin asking, "What exactly did that touch in me?" That question is sharper. It moves you away from blame and closer to awareness. Because once you know the weak spot, the work becomes clearer. You stop treating every emotional reaction as if it came from nowhere. You begin seeing patterns. Maybe disrespect hooks you quickly. Maybe being ignored unsettles you more than you admit. Maybe losing control of timing makes frustration rise fast. Maybe being misunderstood lights something up in you every single time. These are not random details. They are doors into self-knowledge. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind must be observed with honesty. If something keeps provoking you, it is worth studying. Not because you should shame yourself for it, but because whatever can easily disturb you can still influence you. And whatever can still influence you too easily is an opening through which power leaks. That is why this truth is so important. Your reactions are not only emotional events, they are revelations. They show you where your ego is still tender, where your peace is still conditional, and where your self-control still needs strengthening. So the next time something hits you hard, pause before you justify it too quickly. Look at it with more honesty. Ask what it uncovered. Ask what inside you reacted so fast and why. Because every reaction exposes a weak spot. And the more clearly you see that weak spot, the less power it has to keep controlling you. Truth 2. The world tests you through emotion. Life does not always come at you directly. It rarely begins by trying to overpower you with force. Very often it comes another way. It irritates you. It delays you. It insults your pride. It creates pressure, confusion, disrespect, or uncertainty, then quietly watches to see what comes out of you. That is the test. Not just what happened, but what it awakened in you. A small provocation can tell you more about your level of control than a calm day ever could. When things are easy, it is simple to feel wise. It is simple to feel disciplined. But when something touches your ego, disrupts your plan, or threatens the image you have of yourself, that is when life shows you whether your inner world is actually stable or only comfortable. This is one of the harder Stoic truths to accept. A lot of defeat begins long before the visible consequences appear. It begins in the moment emotion gets hold of the wheel. The outside event may be small, but the inner reaction turns it into something much bigger. Then judgment narrows, perspective drops, timing gets worse. You speak too early, decide too fast, or push in the wrong direction. And just like that, life did not defeat you through the event itself. It defeated you through your response to it. That is why emotional discipline is not a soft skill. It is protection. Think about how often damage begins this way. Someone says the right thing to provoke you, and now your calm is gone. A delay appears, and patience disappears with it. Pressure rises, and suddenly you are acting from urgency instead of intelligence. Nothing outside had to overpower you physically. It only had to disturb you enough to make you abandon yourself. That is the danger. Because once emotion controls your movement, you become easier to read, easier to steer, and easier to weaken. Life does not need to crush you if it can simply get you to mismanage your own state. The Stoics understood this deeply. They trained themselves not because they expected a peaceful world, but because they knew the world would keep pulling on emotion, anger, pride, fear, offense, impatience. Those are the doors through which many people lose their power. So this truth asks you to become more observant. The next time something throws you off, do not only focus on what happened. Look at what the moment was asking from you. Was it asking for patience, but you gave it frustration? Was it asking for restraint, but you gave it speed? Was it asking for perspective, but you gave it ego? That is where the lesson is. Because life is constantly testing the quality of your inner government, not to punish you, but to reveal where you still hand emotion too much authority. And once you see that clearly, you stop taking every provocation at face value. You begin noticing the deeper challenge underneath it. Can you stay steady here? Can you stay clear here? Can you remain yourself here? That is the real test. And the more often you pass it, the harder life becomes to use against you. Truth 3. Anger makes you predictable. Anger feels powerful in the moment, but that feeling is often misleading. What it usually gives you is not strength, but exposure. The second anger takes over, something tightens inside you. Your vision narrows. Your attention locks onto the insult, the disrespect, the unfairness, the thing that offended you. And once that happens, your range gets smaller. You stop seeing the full situation. You stop thinking in layers. You stop moving with choice. You start moving with heat. That is why anger makes you predictable. The moment someone knows what easily sets you off, they start learning how to move you. They do not need to overpower you. They only need to touch the right nerve. Once that happens, they can often anticipate the rest. Your tone changes. Your patience disappears. Your words speed up. Your judgment gets louder, but not better. And that is a dangerous trade. Because power is not just about intensity. Power is about range, timing, and control. Anger reduces all three. It convinces you that immediate expression is the same thing as honesty, and that forceful emotion is the same thing as clarity. But anger rarely sees clearly. It wants discharge. It wants release. It wants to answer now, prove now, strike now. That urgency is exactly what makes it easy to read. Marcus Aurelius understood this well. He knew that once the inner state becomes agitated, the mind loses proportion. You start reacting to the surface of things instead of their structure. You answer the insult, but miss the strategy behind it. You defend yourself too quickly and reveal what matters to you too openly. You push hard in one direction and expose where you can be guided, baited, or drained. This is why calm has such an advantage over anger. A calm mind stays difficult to map. It does not reveal everything at once. It does not rush to show its hand. It notices more. It hears more. It leaves space between the feeling and the action, and inside that space there is freedom. Anger shortens that space. That is when mistakes happen. Not always dramatic ones. Sometimes it is one sentence too many, one message sent too fast, one facial expression, one defensive answer, one impulsive decision that tells the other person exactly where your weak point is. Then the moment is no longer only emotional, it becomes strategic. Because once your pattern becomes obvious, your power drops. The other person no longer has to guess much. They know where to press. They know what gets a rise out of you. They know how quickly your state can be shifted. That is why Stoicism does not ask you to deny anger. It asks you not to obey it. You can feel it without surrendering your intelligence to it. You can notice it rising and still decide that it will not be the force that chooses your next move. That decision matters. It protects your dignity, your judgment, and your leverage. So this truth is worth remembering in real time. The moment anger starts speaking loudly inside you, pause and ask a harder question. Not, how do I express this right now? But, what will this emotion make me reveal if I let it lead? That question can save you. Because anger may feel strong, but the person who can be easily angered becomes easier to predict. And the person who becomes easy to predict becomes easier to control. Truth 4. Most regret begins in a heated moment. A lot of damage does not begin with evil intent. It begins with a moment of heat, one message sent too fast, one answer given with pride instead of clarity, one decision made while anger was still loud, one emotional reaction that lasted a few seconds, then created consequences that stayed much longer. That is why this truth matters so much. Regret usually does not arrive while the emotion is happening. In the moment, the reaction feels justified. It feels necessary. It feels like you are finally saying what needed to be said, finally doing what the moment demanded. But once the heat passes, the mind becomes clearer, and then you see it. You were not acting from wisdom. You were acting from agitation. And agitation has terrible timing. It pushes you to speak before you understand. It pushes you to decide before the situation settles. It makes short-term relief feel more important than long-term consequence. That is why one heated moment can undo things that took months or years to build. Trust can crack, opportunities can close, respect can weaken, and the worst part is that logic would have prevented much of it if logic had been given a few more minutes to speak. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that emotion loves speed, while wisdom often asks for space. That space can be small, but it changes everything. A pause before replying, a night before deciding, a few breaths before speaking. Sometimes that is the difference between self-respect and regret. Because once emotion takes over completely, your future stops being protected by your better judgment. You start choosing from the part of you that wants immediate release, not from the part of you that has to live with the result. That is the real cost. You may win the moment and lose the bigger picture. You may feel strong for 10 seconds, then carry the consequences for months. You may finally get it out, only to realize later that what came out was not your best mind. It was just your loudest feeling. And feelings are not always wise. This is why self-control is not about repression. It is about protecting your future from the version of you that only wants relief right now. It is about understanding that not every emotion deserves instant expression, and not every urge deserves action simply because it feels intense. So when the moment gets heated, that is exactly when you need to become slower, not faster, not passive, not weak, just slower, clearer, more deliberate, because this truth is brutal but honest. A lot of regret does not begin with the situation itself. It begins when you let one emotional moment make a decision your calmer self would never have made. Truth 5. If they can trigger you, they can move you. This truth is uncomfortable because it forces you to look at control in a different way. Control is not always loud. It is not always obvious. Sometimes nobody is ordering you, threatening you, or forcing your hand. Sometimes all they have to do is shift your emotional state, and from there, your choices start changing on their own. That is what makes being easily triggered so dangerous. The moment someone can reliably disturb you, they gain access to your direction. They may not control you completely, but they can influence your timing, your tone, your decisions, your focus, and the quality of your judgment. They can pull you into defense, urgency, pride, fear, or anger. And once you are inside one of those states, you stop moving from your center. Now you are moving from reaction, and reaction is easier to steer than clarity. Think about how much can change from one emotional shift. You were calm, then suddenly defensive. You were focused, then suddenly distracted. You were patient, then suddenly rushing to prove something. Nothing physical had to happen. No one had to overpower you. They only had to touch the right place inside you, and from there, your own state began doing the rest. That is why Stoicism treats inner control as real power. If your emotional state can be hijacked easily, your behavior becomes easier to shape. You say things you did not need to say. You explain yourself when silence would have protected you. You chase closure, send the extra message, break your own standards, or abandon your position just because someone managed to pull the right emotional wire. That is movement without permission. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to this principle in his own way. Do not hand your mind over. Do not allow the outside world to decide what kind of inner condition you will live from. Because once that handoff happens, even intelligent people start making weak decisions. This is why the real question in a tense moment is not only, what are they doing? It is also, what is this making me do? That second question can save you. It shifts your attention from the surface to the deeper danger, because the real loss is not always the insult, the disrespect, or the provocation itself. Sometimes the real loss begins when it successfully changes your state. Once that happens, it starts changing your choices, and choices shape consequences. So this truth asks for a higher level of self-respect. Do not let every person have access to your nervous system. Do not let every comment pull you off your path. Do not let every emotional hook earn the right to move you out of position. You can feel the trigger without following it. You can notice the pull without obeying it. You can be aware that something touched a nerve and still refuse to let that nerve decide your next move. That is where strength becomes visible, because if they can trigger you, they can move you. But the day that stops being true is the day your presence becomes much harder to manipulate. Truth 6. Calm people see what emotional people miss. When emotion rises too high, your field of vision gets smaller. You stop seeing the whole situation and start seeing only the part that hurts, offends, scares, or pressures you. That is why emotional intensity can make a person feel alert while actually making them less perceptive. They feel activated, but they are no longer seeing clearly. Calm changes that. A calm mind notices things that emotional urgency usually hides. It notices timing, motive, tone, gaps, patterns. It sees what is being said, but it also sees what is being attempted. It can tell when someone is trying to provoke a reaction, when a situation is asking for patience instead of speed, and when silence would create more strength than explanation ever could. That is a real advantage, because in tense moments, the obvious thing is rarely the most important thing. The obvious thing is the insult, the pressure, the delay, the conflict. But underneath that, there is often something else. A power move, a test, a weakness being exposed, a better option hiding behind the first emotional impulse. Calm is what lets you notice it. That is why the person who stays steady often sees the real leverage in the room. While someone else is busy reacting to tone, they are noticing structure. While someone else is rushing to defend themselves, they are noticing where the situation is actually shifting. While someone else is drowning in offense or panic, they are still able to ask the question that matters most. What is really happening here? That question is hard to ask when emotion is loud. Marcus Aurelius understood that a disturbed mind loses proportion. Once agitation takes over, you stop observing and start projecting. You stop reading reality and start reading your own inner turbulence into it. Then you miss things. You miss the hidden advantage. You miss the opening. You miss the fact that the moment was not asking for reaction at all. It was asking for steadiness. This is why calm is not passive. It is highly active, just quieter. It gathers information. It preserves judgment. It protects timing. It keeps your perception wide. And that wider perception is often what changes outcomes. Because the person who sees more can do more. Not always immediately and not always dramatically. Sometimes the advantage is simply that they do not waste energy where nothing useful can be gained. Sometimes it is that they recognize a trap before stepping into it. Sometimes it is that they can wait long enough to let the other person reveal more than they intended. That is power too, so this truth is worth remembering whenever the emotional temperature starts rising. Calm is not just about keeping your composure, it is about protecting your ability to see what the heated mind would miss. And in many situations, the clearest person is already the strongest person in the room. Truth 7. Emotion wants relief. Wisdom wants results. This is one of the hardest things to remember in the middle of a charged moment. Emotion wants release now. It wants to answer now, fix now, defend now, escape now. It does not care much about the quality of the outcome. It cares about reducing the pressure it feels in the moment. That is why emotion can be so convincing. It tells you that speaking immediately will make things better. It tells you that reacting will give you closure. It tells you that if you just say the sharp thing, send the message, prove your point, or force the issue, the inner tension will finally ease. And sometimes it does ease for a few seconds, but that is the trap. Relief and results are not the same thing. Relief is immediate. Results are lasting. Relief cares about discharge. Results care about direction. Relief asks, how do I stop feeling this right now? Wisdom asks, what choice protects my future best? That is a completely different standard. A lot of bad decisions come from confusing emotional relief with intelligent action. You say something because it feels unbearable not to say it. You make a move because waiting feels weak. You push for clarity because uncertainty feels heavy. But later, when the feeling settles, you realize the action did not really serve you. It only served the emotion that wanted out. The Stoics were very aware of this split. They knew that feelings can speak loudly without speaking wisely. That is why they trained themselves not to obey the first inner demand. They created space, not because they were passive, but because they understood that what feels urgent is not always what is useful. That space changes everything. Inside it, you can ask better questions. Will this help, or only satisfy my emotion for a moment? Will this move things forward, or just make me feel temporarily less tense? Am I trying to solve the situation, or am I just trying to get rid of the feeling? Those questions protect you from handing the steering wheel to the part of you that only wants instant release. And that matters because your future is built by what you choose in pressured moments, not by what you feel, but by what you do with what you feel. Anyone can act from emotion. Wisdom begins when you stop treating every feeling like an order. This is where patience becomes powerful. Not passive waiting, but disciplined restraint. The kind that says, I feel this strongly, but I do not have to act from it immediately. That kind of restraint keeps your judgment intact. It protects your standards. It keeps one emotional wave from deciding something larger than itself. So this truth is simple, but it cuts deep. Emotion wants relief. Wisdom wants results. One is trying to reduce pressure. The other is trying to protect your life from being shaped by whatever you happen to feel in the hottest part of the moment. And the more clearly you see that difference, the less likely you are to trade a lasting advantage for a few seconds of emotional release. Truth 8. Silence is sometimes the highest form of power. Not every moment deserves your voice. That is hard to accept when something feels insulting, unfair, or deliberately provocative. The first impulse is usually to answer, correct, explain, defend, or prove that you saw exactly what was happening. Part of you wants to step in immediately so the moment does not sit there uncontested. But this is where silence becomes power, because speaking is not always strength. Sometimes speaking is surrender. Sometimes the reply you're about to give is exactly what the other person wanted. Your attention, your emotional energy, your visible reaction, your need to engage. And the moment you hand that over, the balance shifts. Silence interrupts that transfer. It does not always mean saying nothing forever. It means refusing to react just because the moment is noisy. It means understanding that an insult is not automatically entitled to your defense, that provocation is not automatically entitled to your response, and that conflict is not automatically worthy of your energy. That takes discipline. A lot of people speak because they feel they must protect their image. They want the last word. They want to make sure they are not misunderstood. They want to show that they are strong enough to answer back. But real strength is often quieter than that. It does not panic when misunderstood. It does not rush to perform power. It chooses carefully when expression serves something useful and when silence serves something greater. Marcus Aurelius understood this kind of restraint. He knew that dignity does not always need to announce itself. In many situations, the strongest move is to stay above the emotional level where the bait was placed. Once you step down into that level, you start playing the other person's game. Silence protects you from that. It protects your timing. It protects your clarity. It protects your leverage. It also reveals things. When you do not immediately fill the space with reaction, people often expose more of themselves. Their insecurity becomes clearer. Their intention becomes clearer. Their lack of control becomes clearer. Meanwhile, you remain harder to read, harder to rush, and harder to pull off center. That is not weakness. That is command. Of course, silence is not always the answer. There are moments that require speech, boundaries, and direct action. But the key is this: your response should come from choice, not compulsion. If you speak, let it be because it serves the situation, not because your emotion demanded release. That is the difference. So this truth asks you to become more selective with your energy. Stop treating every provocation like an invitation. Stop assuming every insult deserves a defense. Stop acting as if every conflict must become personal. Sometimes the highest form of power is not what you say. It is what you refuse to join. Truth 9. Detachment protects your direction. The moment you become too emotionally entangled, your direction starts getting harder to hold. You may still tell yourself you know what matters. You may still say you have standards, purpose, discipline, and clarity. But once emotion wraps itself too tightly around a person, a conflict, an outcome, or a fear, something subtle begins to happen. Your focus bends. Your judgment gets pulled. Your path starts adjusting itself around whatever has captured you emotionally. That is the danger, because attachment does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like overthinking. Sometimes it looks like checking too often, explaining too much, waiting too long, or abandoning your own rhythm just to manage a situation that has gotten too deep inside your head. And while all of that is happening, your direction starts fading into the background. This is why detachment matters so much. It protects the line between what you value and what is merely trying to consume your attention. Without detachment, it becomes easy to lose yourself inside emotional weather. A person unsettles you, and suddenly your standards weaken. A situation frustrates you, and now your purpose is no longer leading your day. An outcome matters too much, and you start compromising your character just to move it in the direction you want. That is how people drift, not always through laziness, sometimes through emotional involvement that got too strong and too unexamined. The Stoics understood that if your inner state is always being pulled outward, your life will slowly stop belonging to your principles. It will start belonging to whatever currently has the strongest emotional grip on you. That could be desire, fear, resentment, offense, need. But whichever one it is, the result is the same. You stop walking your path cleanly. Detachment keeps that from happening. It gives you enough inner space to ask better questions. Does this deserve this much of my mind? Is this helping me stay aligned, or is it quietly dragging me away from myself? Am I still acting from my standards, or am I reacting from emotional entanglement? Those questions restore direction, because once you step back emotionally, you can see again. You can tell what actually matters and what has simply become loud. You can recognize where your energy is being wasted. You can return to your center before one attachment turns into a full detour. And that return matters more than people think. A clear direction is not protected only by ambition. It is protected by emotional discipline, by knowing when to care, when to step back, when to release, and when to stop feeding something that keeps pulling you away from the life you are trying to build. So this truth is simple, but it carries weight. Detachment is not distance for the sake of distance. It is protection. It keeps your mind from being dragged too far from your values, your standards, and your purpose. Because once you lose direction emotionally, you start giving away parts of your life without even realizing it. And detachment is often what brings you back before too much is lost. Truth 10. A strong mind does not obey every feeling. A strong mind is not a mind that feels nothing. It is a mind that knows the difference between feeling something and surrendering to it. That difference is everything. Fear can rise in you and still not become your master. Frustration can show up and still not get to decide your tone. Desire can pull hard and still not be allowed to rewrite your standards. The feeling is real, but its presence does not make it a command. This is where strength becomes visible, because a lot can live inside you at once. You can feel anger and still choose restraint. You can feel pressure and still move slowly. You can feel temptation and still say no. That is not repression. That is inner government. It is the ability to let emotions speak without handing it authority over your next move. The Stoics cared deeply about that distinction. They knew the inner world would never be silent all the time. Thoughts would come, reactions would rise, impulses would press for expression. The real question was never, can I stop all of that from appearing? The real question was, who rules once it appears? That is the whole issue, because feelings are fast. They arrive with force. They make themselves sound urgent, necessary, unquestionable. In the moment, they often present themselves as truth. But feeling something strongly does not automatically make it wise. It does not automatically make it useful. It does not automatically make it worthy of action. A strong mind remembers that. It creates distance between the inner signal and the outward choice. Not a cold distance, a clean one. Enough space to ask, what am I feeling right now, and what would happen if I let this feeling lead? That question protects a lot. It protects your standards when desire tries to pull you off your path. It protects your peace when frustration wants to spill everywhere. It protects your future when fear tries to make a short-term decision sound like a necessary escape. And over time, that way of living changes you. You stop treating every feeling like an emergency. You stop assuming that intensity must be acted on. You begin trusting yourself more because you know that even when your inner world gets loud, you are not required to obey the loudest voice in the room. That is real solidity, not the absence of emotion, but freedom from emotional dictatorship. So this truth asks for maturity. Let fear speak, but do not let it drive. Let frustration rise, but do not let it use your mouth. Let desire knock, but do not let it move into the seat of command. Because the strong mind is not the one that never feels. It is the one that never forgets who is supposed to rule. Truth 11. The person who stays unmoved controls the frame. In tense situations, the real advantage is often quieter than it looks. It is not always the louder voice, the sharper comeback, or the person pushing hardest. Very often, the hidden advantage belongs to the one who stays centered while everything around them is trying to create movement. That matters because the person who stays unmoved does something powerful without announcing it. They stop the situation from defining the emotional tone for them. They do not rush to match the pressure, match the anger, or match the urgency. And because of that, they keep something the other person may already be losing: perspective. Once you lose your center, you usually start playing inside someone else's frame. Their tempo becomes your tempo. Their emotion becomes your atmosphere. Their pressure becomes your pressure. Then, even if you are still speaking, deciding, or arguing, you are no longer leading yourself fully. You are reacting inside conditions that were set for you. The unmoved person breaks that pattern. They do not let the room tell them how fast to think. They do not let tension decide their tone. They do not let another person's instability become their own. That creates leverage, because the one who remains steady can observe while the other person reveals. They can wait while the other person speeds up. They can notice where the weakness is, where the real pressure is, and where the moment is actually trying to go. Meanwhile, the emotionally moved person is often too busy defending, proving, or reacting to realize they have already surrendered control of the frame. This is why centered people often seem stronger than they even need to appear. Their power is not coming from performance. It is coming from the fact that they are still choosing, while the other person is already being carried by the moment. Marcus Aurelius understood this kind of strength. A disciplined mind does not hand over its posture just because the environment becomes difficult. It holds its shape. And when a mind holds its shape under pressure, it becomes very hard to manipulate. That is what controlling the frame really means. It means the moment does not get to rearrange you. It means another person's tone does not become your inner climate. It means you stay rooted enough to decide how you will move instead of being pushed into motion. And once that happens, the whole situation changes. You become harder to rush, harder to bait, harder to corner. You also become clearer because your energy is no longer being burned up in emotional turbulence. You can still be firm. You can still speak. You can still act. But now everything comes from a place of command, not disturbance. So this truth is worth remembering whenever the pressure starts rising. Staying unmoved is not passivity. It is positional strength. It keeps you from being swallowed by the emotional design of the moment. And in many situations, the one who stays centered is already the one shaping the outcome, even before anyone else notices it. Truth 12. The day you stop reacting is the day you become dangerous. Not dangerous in a reckless way, not cruel, not cold. Dangerous in the sense that you become very hard to control. That is a different kind of power. As long as people can rush you, bait you, offend you, flatter you, or shake your emotional balance, they can still influence your behavior in quiet ways. They can pull you off your rhythm. They can make you reveal too much. They can turn your attention away from what matters and toward whatever emotional hook they know will work. But the day that stops working, everything changes. You stop being easy to read. You stop being easy to provoke. You stop being easy to manipulate through urgency, insult, praise, fear, or pressure. And that makes you powerful in a way that is hard to compete with, because now your choices come from observation, not impulse. Your timing comes from judgment, not agitation. Your silence becomes meaningful. Your words become more precise because they are no longer leaking out of whatever feeling arrived first. That is what makes non-reaction so strong. It protects your mind from becoming public property. It keeps your inner state from being constantly rearranged by the outside world. It allows you to remain yourself in situations that are designed to make you forget yourself. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to this kind of discipline. He knew that the mind must not be handed over cheaply. Once it is, even strong people become unstable. But when a person learns how to stay steady under pressure, something very real happens. Their presence changes, their decisions improve, their emotional weak spots stop being open doors. That is why this truth feels so final. The day you stop reacting automatically is the day you become difficult to shake. People can still speak, life can still test you, situations can still become tense. But the old access disappears. They can no longer count on moving you so easily. They can no longer predict your next step just because they touched a nerve. And when that happens, you stop living like someone who is always being handled by the moment. You start living like someone who handles the moment. That is power, not the power of domination, the power of self-command. And once a person has that, they stop wasting so much life in emotional traps. They become quieter but stronger, slower but sharper, less dramatic but much harder to defeat in the ways that matter. So this is what all 12 truths keep pointing to. Power is not only about what you can do, it is also about what you can refuse to be moved by. A lot of people think strength is intensity. They think it is loudness, speed, force, or emotional fire. But Stoicism keeps teaching a harder lesson. Real strength is often the ability to remain clear when the moment is trying to make you clouded, to remain measured when the pressure is trying to make you rush, to remain rooted when something outside you is trying to pull you out of yourself. That is where control begins. And once you really see that, you start relating to your reactions differently. They stop being random emotional moments. They become information. They show you where your peace is still conditional, where your pride is still exposed, where your fear still speaks too loudly, and where your self-command still needs training. That is not bad news. It is useful news, because now the work becomes clearer. You stop asking only how to win outside. You start learning how to govern inside. And that changes the quality of everything. Your relationships, your decisions, your timing, your standards, your future. So maybe that is the real invitation here. Study what moves you. Study what speeds you up. Study what makes you abandon yourself. Then begin strengthening those places quietly, honestly, and without performance. Because the more mastery you build over your inner world, the less the outer world can use against you. And that does not make you empty. It makes you solid. The moment you stop reacting to everything is not the moment you become less human. It is the moment you become less available for manipulation, less vulnerable to impulse, and far more capable of carrying real power without wasting it.